5. Gemini. My eyes and ears pulse from a rush of anxiety, but combat training of the previous 2 weeks had brought a kind of comfort to the routine of swinging my katana. I grasped it as naturally as a fork or knife as I swung and stabbed through my combos, trying to create new effects with the use of attacks that produced wind, water, earth, and fire effects. But handling the blade was a different skill than mastering unlisted combination after effects by combining the element charges gained by different attacks. I expected a player-only class like Samurai would show crazy ability expansions as I pushed toward Shogun at level 30. I'd also spent those 2 weeks trying to meditate in the mornings and renew my affirmations. With practice, I could apply my gaming skills of old to my new world, despite the very real pain of combat in Enora and the simulated chemical reactions inside my body when under stress. Again and again, the world had proven an experience beyond gaming. Again and again, I'd proven how utter realism could change the way a human consciousness responded to stressful situations, regardless of gaming experience. Pain was a great teacher. To call Enora a game was to call a Ferrari a car. It didn't do it justice. While I was certain there'd be gamers who would have laughed at a live feed of my occasional bumbling in the world, they'd be clueless. One couldn't understand it until they stood in the dark wood, or at the Plague Baron's gates. Then all the rules they'd lived by blew away on a fiery breeze of hot pain. I looked forward to watching all those game studs fall on their faces someday. Even though I still hadn't discovered my spirit ability, and not having Rashan to help guide me sucked, the meditation with the Cine after our run still leveled my mental faculties. I just needed to focus, minimize the mistakes, and be willing to do what needed to be done, like I had when I crushed the entropy crystal. Rashan was incensed by that decision, but it saved her backside, and I refused to debate its merits. Sometimes the NPCs in this game. Despite their low level, my stealth boots muffled my footfalls like they always had. Too bad the same couldn't be said for my katana's sheath. Giles and our orc laborer Moggy had designed the scabbard strapped across my back so the sword locked into place. It was a fine bit of craftsmanship considering the minimal resources available in a level 1 foundation. Unfortunately, when I withdrew my weapon, it clicked. Then the blade gave off a steely whistle. I was going to have to get used to that. The ranger's voice had croaked with sudden shock, so I doubted it had carried beyond the trees. When the man turned and yelled in alarm to his lumberjack partners, I didn't panic. The idea they'd be on me in a few moments didn't even bring my head around to check their positions. Instead, I lunged forward, transferred all my momentum into the swinging arc of my blade, sliced through a hand the man had thrown up in defense, and tore open a clean gash through his neck. A pulsating splash of blood belched from the wound and splattered on the ground. It was pretty gross. Critical wound. The ranger reached for the gap, then a fresh pulsing river of crimson flooded through his fingers. I brought the sword around again and separated the top half of his head from the bottom with a forceful slice, dividing the bridge of his nose. His skull split like ice cream. You used Hedosuresu. Head slice. Killing blow. +1 fire charge. When it gave me a single fire charge, it also spent 35% of my Kasai ability pool, which was the fire equivalent to a caster's mana pool. The result might have been even more disgusting, but I didn't watch the after effects of my finishing blow. Instead, I slipped to the side as the separated parts of his body thumped to the ground, then put the tree he'd planned to pee on between myself and his brothers in arms. You have defeated a level 21 ranger, 1,769 XP.
Chantley, what is it?
As the next man stepped around the tree and peered down, I brought the blade down and sliced his face off for another fire charge. Then I twisted and thrust the tip of my blade between his ribs. You use Yokogiri, side cut, killing blow, +1 earth charge. Side cut was actually designed for me to evade an attack by twisting my body and stabbing outward in reply, but I was trying to get some real-world practice. Melee wasn't so bad when no one touched me. A gurgling scream resonated through the trees before he fell to his death. My mind flashed to an image of the man with the maroon skin gathering forces and running my way, but the third target loomed. As I lashed out with my blade, he slipped to one side. Unlike his compatriots, he'd remembered his weapons. His axe thumped to the ground as he yanked 2 short swords from his belt. "Oh, you're going to pay for this, my friend." He spun a sword's hilt over the back of his hand. "Bring it." I adjusted my fingers around my outstretched sword. "I'm just dying to watch you try." "You got the dying part right." He lunged. His sword swept in blurry motions. I parried one, spun away from the other, then juked my sword to grab his attention. When he sidestepped the blow he thought was coming, I lunged forward and kicked the side of his knee. It was a Giles trick. He sprawled to the ground, and one of his swords went flying. Before he could react, I reversed my grip and shoved the blade down through his chest and into the ground beneath. The other sword slipped from his grip and clinked against a fallen branch. Blood spilled from his lips as he gripped the blade with both hands. I stared down at him. "Guess that didn't work out like you planned." Then I twisted the pommel. I loved me some twisting. "There!" I raised my head to find no fewer than 5 men entering the forest, weapons at the ready. I bagged the swords, yanked out my katana, then sped out of the grove, heading south across the open field in pursuit of the wider thicket of trees in that direction. "Get him!" a voice shouted from behind me. I spared a glance over one shoulder to find 6 men exiting the trees just as I entered the next grove. Then my attention was drawn by the unmistakable sound of galloping as a horse burst from the woods behind them. The umber-skinned rider wore a suit of silver plate. A 2-handed sword bounced as he gripped it in one gloved hand. Maybe the XP grab hadn't been the best idea. When I was certain I'd progressed far enough into the tree line to fall from my pursuer's sightline, I turned hard to the right, then sprinted toward a patch of thick pines. I hurdled a rotten log, careful to check my feet beneath me as I landed. If the dark wood had taught me anything, it was to watch my footing when among unpredictable underbrush. A dark recess caught my attention as I flew over, and after my momentum carried me a few steps forward, I screeched to a halt. Voices continued to bellow in the trees to my north, and I scanned to see if I could locate their sources as I approached the log. Satisfied they were still walking down the center of the woods, I crouched next to the log and peered into a wide hole beneath. After gathering the pine straw my sudden stop had bunched up. I slithered into the hole, then pulled a few handfuls atop myself. I counted the thumps in my ear until I'd been out of sight long enough for combat mode to end. Then I cast stealth for good measure. My boot slipped on some loose rocks in the dirt below, and I found myself sliding farther down the hole. What the heck? I came to an abrupt halt against an underground boulder just as the crunching of sticks followed by a shower of pine straw reached me from above. The knot of a broken branch poked my back as I pushed myself down, then froze. Time crawled despite the accelerated thumping in my chest. I slowed my breathing and listened. Muffled voices called out what were likely occasional reports. My hands became sore due to my death grip on my sword. A footfall above. I jerked, then stilled. Then a low rumble in the earth below, somewhere behind me as I rested against a stony wall. My head whipped around. I cast my classic Gnostic inner illumination, but since I hadn't leveled my light spells to keep pace with my combat level, the way it used ambient light like night vision goggles was penalized, and the skill rendered visible only a pair of huge yellow eyes glaring back at me.